She sat in seat 19C for 7 years of hiding. Plain clothes. Quiet voice. Nobody ever looked twice. She had worked very hard to become nobody. Then an F-22 fighter pilot's voice came through the cabin speakers and said 4 words that destroyed everything. "Ma'am, is that you, Night Fury?" Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Her name was Maya Reeves. At least, that is what her driving license said. That is what her office ID card said. That is what the barista at the coffee shop near her apartment wrote on her cup every single morning without even asking anymore, because she had been coming in for so long that nobody needed to ask. Maya Reeves. Data analyst. Denver, Colorado. Apartment 4B. 1 cat named Chester. 1 small balcony with 3 tomato plants that never grew very well because the building faced north and did not get enough sun, but she kept trying every year because it gave her something to do on weekends. That was her life. It was a very quiet life. A very small life. And she had built it with great care, the way a person builds something they plan to live inside for a long time. Every detail was chosen on purpose. The ordinary job. The forgettable apartment. The neighborhood where nobody knew their neighbors. The clothing she wore, plain colors, nothing that stood out, nothing that anyone would describe later if asked. The way she walked, slightly slow, slightly rounded at the shoulders, the walk of a person who is in no particular hurry and has nothing particularly important to do. 7 years she had lived like this. 7 years of being Maya Reeves. Before that, she had been someone else. But she did not think about that. She had made a decision 7 years ago and she had kept to it every single day since, and the decision was simple: that person was gone. That life was over. The woman who used to exist before Maya Reeves was someone she no longer had anything to do with. She was very good at keeping that decision. She sat in seat 19C on American Continental Flight 2209, heading from Denver to Washington. Window seat. She always booked the window seat because it meant only 1 neighbor instead of 2, and 1 neighbor was easier to avoid talking to than 2. The man in 19B was asleep before they even finished taxiing. The woman in 19A had headphones in and was watching something on her tablet. Maya put in her own earphones, opened the book she had brought, and disappeared into it the way she disappeared into everything, completely, without trace, leaving no impression that anyone would remember later. Outside the window, Denver shrank below them and then vanished into cloud. She turned a page. She was not thinking about anything except the book. That was how she liked it. 1 hour and 20 minutes into the flight, something changed. Maya felt it before she heard anything. It was a feeling in the base of her spine, a very small and specific feeling, like the floor of a building shifting by half an inch. Something that was not turbulence. Something that had a different texture than turbulence, a different weight. She stopped reading. She did not move. She did not look around. She just sat with the book open on her lap and she listened with her whole body the way she had not let herself listen to anything in 7 years. The engines sounded right. The altitude felt right. The movement of the aircraft through the air felt, almost right. Almost. There was something underneath the normalcy that was not quite normal, a kind of reluctance in the way the plane was holding itself steady, as though it was working slightly harder than it should have been. She turned a page without reading what was on it. 2 minutes passed. Then the captain's voice came over the speakers, very calm and very professional in the way that is specifically trained to sound calm and professional even when it is not. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Harris speaking. We are showing a minor alert on one of our navigation systems. This is not unusual and our crew is handling it. We do ask that you return to your seats and keep your seatbelts fastened as a precaution. We expect no interruption to your flight experience. Thank you." The man in 19B slept through the entire announcement. Maya set her book down very carefully on her tray table. Navigation alert. That word, alert, not failure, not warning, not problem. Alert was the word you used when you wanted to say something without saying it. Alert was the word that bought you time before the next announcement, the one where the language would have to get more honest. She pressed her back against her seat and folded her hands in her lap and looked at the seat pocket in front of her. She was not going to think about this. This was not her problem. She was Maya Reeves, data analyst, going to Washington for a quarterly review meeting, and whatever was happening with the navigation system was the responsibility of two trained professionals in the cockpit and the very large company that employed them, and it had nothing to do with her. She picked up her book. She read the same sentence 4 times and did not take in a single word of it. The second announcement came 9 minutes later. By then, Maya had already noticed 2 other things. The first was another of those small floor shift feelings, slightly stronger this time, lasting maybe 2 seconds before the aircraft corrected. The second was the behavior of the flight attendants, not what they were doing, exactly, but the quality of it, the way their movements had gotten slightly more deliberate, slightly more efficient, the way people move when they are managing something carefully. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Harris again. We are currently experiencing some additional technical issues that our team is working to resolve. As a precaution, we are asking all passengers to ensure their seatbelts are securely fastened. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin. Secure the cabin. Those words had a meaning. A specific, technical meaning. They were not words that appeared in routine announcements. The man in 19B woke up. He looked around with the confused expression of someone who fell asleep in a normal situation and woke up in a different one. "What's going on?" he asked. "I'm sure it's fine," Maya said, in the flat, uninterested voice of someone who knows nothing about aircraft. He nodded, wanting very much to believe her, and went back to looking at his phone. Maya looked out the window. The wing was visible from her seat. She watched it. From the outside, it looked completely normal. But she was not looking at how it looked. She was looking at how it moved, the micro-adjustments, the tiny corrections, and what she saw in those adjustments told her something that she did not want to know. The hydraulics were struggling. Not failing. Not yet. But struggling, which meant that failing was a direction rather than a destination, and the question was how far in that direction they were going to travel and how quickly. She made herself stop looking at the wing. She was not going to think about this. The oxygen masks came down 18 minutes after takeoff from Denver. They dropped from the compartments above with a sound like shuffling cards, all at once across the entire cabin, and for 1 second everyone was completely silent, and then the silence broke into noise, passengers crying out, a child screaming somewhere near the back, someone saying "Oh God, oh God, oh God" in a voice that kept going, the automated system speaking over all of it in a recorded voice of absolute calm, telling everyone to place the mask over their nose and mouth and breathe normally. Maya put her mask on in 3 seconds. She had done it thousands of times. Her hands moved without instruction, pulling the elastic, fitting the cup, checking the seal. Done before most passengers had even reached up for theirs. She helped the man next to her. He was fumbling badly, hands shaking, and she reached over and guided the mask into place the way you guide a child, firmly and gently. She helped the woman in 19A as well, who had turned around with the look of someone whose body had gone ahead of their mind into pure fear. Both of them looked at her strangely. She was too calm. She moved too smoothly. In a cabin full of people who were frightened and fumbling, she had done everything with the quiet efficiency of someone for whom this was routine, and it was not routine for anyone on this aircraft, it should not have been routine for anyone on this aircraft. She sat back in her seat and looked straight ahead. The captain's voice came again, and this time the professional calm was still there, but it had gone thin at the edges, the way a coat goes thin at the elbows. "This is Captain Harris. We are declaring a flight emergency. I repeat, we are declaring a flight emergency. Air traffic control has been notified. We are working urgently to identify a landing location, and I want to assure every one of you that my crew and I are doing everything in our power to get you safely on the ground. Please listen to your flight attendants and follow their instructions immediately. The cabin noise went up. Maya sat in 19C with her hands folded and her mask on and her eyes on the seat pocket in front of her, and she felt the weight of every single person on the aircraft pressing down on the space between her shoulders, and she did not move. She was not going to think about this. She was not going to be who she used to be. She was Maya Reeves. Maya Reeves was going to sit in this seat and trust the professionals and wait. 5 minutes later, something came through the cabin speakers that changed everything. It happened because of a technical mistake, a cross-channel, a button pressed in the wrong sequence in a cockpit where 2 people were managing more things than 2 people could properly manage. The cockpit radio feed opened onto the cabin speakers, and for 4 minutes and 31 seconds, every single passenger on Flight 2209 heard everything. They heard Captain Harris's voice, tighter now, more urgent, talking to air traffic control about hydraulic failure and navigation blackout and the rate of altitude loss. They heard the first officer's voice listing systems, one after another, most of them showing the same word, failed, failed, degraded, failed. They heard air traffic control naming airports, too far, maybe, too far. And then they heard a new voice. It came in clear and sharp over the cockpit radio, the voice of someone used to communicating over noise, the clipped and precise rhythm that belonged to a specific kind of person in a specific kind of aircraft. Continental 2209, this is Viper Lead, 388 Fighter Wing, United States Air Force. We have been scrambled to your position. I have you visual. Please state your full situation. Captain Harris responded immediately, Viper Lead, we have total hydraulic failure, navigation is black, flight controls at 30% response. We are losing altitude and we cannot stop it with current inputs. I have 294 people on board. Copy all, 2209. Stand by. The whole cabin was silent now. Every passenger who had been crying, praying, talking on their phone, all of them stopped. They were listening. They could not help it. The cockpit was speaking directly into their ears and they heard every word. Then the military voice came back. And what he said next was something that nobody on Flight 2209, not the passengers, not the flight attendants, not Captain Harris himself, was expecting. 2209, I need to ask you something before we go further. I am looking at your passenger manifest right now. I need you to check if there is a woman in seat 19C. Traveling alone. Name listed as Maya Reeves. Captain Harris, confused, say again, Viper Lead. Seat 19C. Female passenger. Maya Reeves. Can you confirm she is on your aircraft? A pause. Then Harris, even more confused, stand by. The cabin was absolutely still. 294 people holding their breath. Maya felt every single one of them. She felt their eyes before they even turned. She felt the moment the announcement ended and the silence expanded and people began to understand that something extraordinary was happening, that the Air Force pilot circling their dying aircraft was not asking about navigation data or wind conditions or landing strips. He was asking about a woman in seat 19C. The flight attendant appeared at her row in seconds, leaning across 19B, looking at Maya with an expression of total bewilderment. Are you Maya Reeves? Seat 19C. The man next to Maya turned to look at her. The woman in 19A pulled out one headphone. The people in the row ahead had turned around. The people across the aisle were looking. 294 people, or as many of them as could see or hear, were now looking at the unremarkable woman in the gray sweater in seat 19C. 7 years. 7 years of invisible. 7 years of ordinary. 7 years of being no one, nothing, the woman whose name nobody remembered, the passenger nobody noticed. All of it was about to end. She could feel it ending. She could feel every second of those 7 years dissolving like paper in water, and there was nothing she could do to stop it, because the voice was going to say what it was going to say, and it was going to say it into every ear on this aircraft, and after that there would be no going back to the apartment and the cat and the tomatoes. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm Maya Reeves." The flight attendant relayed this to the cockpit. The cockpit relayed it to the radio. And then the voice of the F-22 pilot came through the cabin speakers, and the words fell into that enormous silence, and they fell clearly and precisely, with a pause in the middle that lasted exactly long enough to carry everything it needed to carry. "Ma'am, is that you? Night Fury?" Nobody breathed. 294 people had just heard those words. They had heard the pause before them, the kind of pause that contains recognition and shock and something close to awe all at once. They had heard the way the pilot's voice changed on those two words at the end, not louder, not softer, but different in the way a voice goes different when it is saying something it has not expected to say, something it has been waiting years to say without knowing it was waiting. Night Fury. The words meant nothing to almost everyone on the aircraft. To the woman in seat 19C, they meant everything. Maya sat completely still. She had not moved since the words came through the speaker. Her hands were in her lap. Her mask was around her neck. Her eyes were fixed on the seat pocket in front of her with the specific, deliberate focus of a person who is holding themselves together by not looking at the people looking at her. The man in 19B was staring at her openly now. The rows ahead and behind had turned. The flight attendant was still crouching in the aisle, looking at her with an expression that had moved past bewilderment into something she could not quite name. The radio crackled again. A different voice now: "Harris, the captain, low and urgent, Viper lead, please clarify. Who are you addressing and why is this relevant to our emergency?" The pilot's answer came without hesitation. "Captain, if the woman in 19C is who I believe she is, you have someone on your aircraft with more emergency landing experience than anyone currently involved in this situation. She trained half the combat pilots in my wing. She wrote the crisis procedure manual we used to find you tonight. She has landed aircraft with worse damage than yours in conditions that would make your current situation look straightforward." Silence on the radio. "Harris again, you're talking about a passenger." "I'm talking about the best pilot I have ever seen in 16 years of flying, sir. She went quiet 7 years ago and nobody knew where she was. I would not be asking this if I had any other option." The cabin had gone somewhere beyond quiet. It was the silence of people who have stopped thinking about their own fear because they are too busy thinking about something else. Every eye in that cabin was on Maya. She could feel the weight of them. She could feel the questions forming in real time: who is this woman, what does Night Fury mean, why does an Air Force pilot sound like that when he says her name, what is she doing sitting in seat 19C in a gray sweater looking like nobody when she is apparently, impossibly, somebody. 7 years. Gone. She knew it was gone. She could feel the exact shape of everything she had built falling away, every careful ordinary detail of the life she had constructed, the coffee shop and the cat and the apartment and the name and the way she had learned to take up exactly the right amount of space so that nobody ever looked twice. All of it. Gone. In the space between one breath and the next, she made a decision. She unclipped her seatbelt. She stood up and the cabin seemed to reorganize itself around her. It was not anything she did deliberately. She did not raise her voice or make any large movement. She simply stood up and something changed in the way she occupied space. The rounded shoulders were gone. The carefully practiced ordinariness was gone. She stood the way she had stood for 16 years before Denver, with a kind of stillness that was not stillness at all but controlled readiness, and every person who saw it felt it without being able to say exactly what they were seeing. The flight attendant stood back. Maya moved into the aisle. People watched her pass. A woman near the window reached out and touched her arm as she went by, just briefly, just her fingertips, the way people reach for something solid when everything is moving. Maya did not stop, but she did not pull away either. She reached the cockpit door and knocked. The door opened. The cockpit was loud with alarms and bright with warning lights, and both men in the front seats were doing the work of 4 people and still losing ground. Captain Harris glanced back at her as she came in and his face held everything at once, desperate hope, deep uncertainty, the expression of a man who has run out of options and has been handed something he does not fully understand but is going to use anyway. "Are you?" he started. "Yes," she said. She picked the spare headset off the hook without being asked and put it on. "I need everything. Current altitude, rate of descent, hydraulic status, control response, fuel, distance to the nearest flat surface that can hold this aircraft." Harris gave it to her. All of it, without hesitation, in the flat precise language of a pilot reading instruments. She listened to every number and loaded them as he spoke. She keyed the radio. "Viper lead, this is," she stopped for exactly half a second. Then, "This is Night Fury. I am in the cockpit. Give me your assessment from outside." The response came back so fast it was almost immediate. "Night Fury." His voice cracked on the two syllables and then steadied. "Ma'am. I can't, I didn't know if you were really." "Assessment," she said. Not unkindly. But clear. "Right." She could hear him pull himself together. "You're at 19,000, losing approximately 400 feet per minute. Hydraulics are effectively gone, you're on backup electrical controls only. Those will hold but they're slow and they don't like input above a certain threshold. I've got a military auxiliary strip 43 miles southwest. 8,000 feet of runway. It's short for your aircraft but it's flat, it's clear, and I've already called ahead. They're lighting it up now. Wind? South-southwest, 12 knots. Consistent. Good. I want you on my left wing for the approach. Do not leave that position. Copy that. Not going anywhere, ma'am." She turned to Captain Harris. He was watching her with an expression she recognized. She had seen it on many faces over the years, the specific look of a skilled professional encountering someone operating at a level that makes their own skill feel different in comparison. Not lesser. Just different. Contextualized. "Captain," she said, "I need you to fly this aircraft. I'm not taking the controls. You know this plane and I don't, and that matters. What I'm going to do is tell you exactly what inputs to make and when to make them, and I need you to trust that even when it feels wrong, because some of what I'm going to ask you to do is going to feel wrong. Can you do that?" Harris looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. "Yes," he said. "Good. First thing, reduce your input force by 30%. You're fighting the backup controls and losing energy you're going to need later. Let the aircraft move a little more. I know that feels backwards. Do it anyway." He did it. The aircraft moved differently, not better, exactly, but differently, in a way that Maya could work with. She began. She had done this before. Not this exactly, not a Boeing passenger aircraft with backup electrical controls and 294 civilians in the back. But she had done the shape of it. She had done worse, in some ways. She had brought aircraft home that should not have been brought home, over terrain that did not want her there, with damage that should have been fatal, with people in headsets telling her it was not possible and her making it possible anyway. She had stopped letting herself remember those times. She remembered them now. She talked to Rowe, Viper lead, Captain Daniel Rowe, who had been 26 years old when she first trained him and was now somewhere to the left of a dying commercial aircraft and the best outside eye she had ever had. She talked to Captain Harris, guiding his hands with words, telling him what to do and why when she had time for why and only what when she did not. She talked to air traffic control. She called the airstrip. She got weather. She got updated runway conditions. She ran the numbers in her head, the descent rate, the distance, the fuel, the control response, and she ran them constantly, updated them constantly, because the numbers changed and the decisions changed with them. The first officer watched all of this with the look of a man watching something he did not expect to see in his life. Nobody spoke except when spoken to. The aircraft was difficult. Backup electrical controls on a plane this size were not designed for this kind of work, they were designed to keep things stable while you found a proper landing, not to execute a precision approach to a short military strip. Every input Harris made arrived slightly late and with slightly less authority than it should have had, and Maya accounted for all of it, calling her corrections earlier, asking for larger inputs in smaller increments, building a rhythm with Harris that after 20 minutes felt like something approaching a language between them. Outside the window on the left, she could see the F-22. Very occasionally she looked at it. It was steady, exactly where she had asked it to be, and knowing it was there was worth something she could not have explained to someone who had not needed it. 30 miles. 20. The altimeter counted down. The descent rate held. The numbers said possible if everything went right, and she made sure everything went right by treating every single variable as something she could control, whether it was technically in her control or not, because that was the only way to do this kind of work. 15 miles. She heard something behind her, through the closed cockpit door. She could not make out words, but she could hear the texture of it. Quiet now, back there, 294 people sitting in the dark with their seatbelts on and their masks around their necks. She wondered what they were thinking. She wondered if any of them were thinking about the woman who had been sitting in 19C for an hour being completely invisible, or whether they had stopped thinking about that and were only thinking about the runway. 10 miles. Gear, she said. Harris reached for the lever. Slowly, she said. The hydraulics are gone but the backup pneumatics will work once. Give it time. He slowed his hand. The gear came down in segments, complaining, and the aircraft shook with it, and then it locked and the indicator light went green and she heard Rose's voice in her ear, "Gear looks good from here." All three. Copy, she said. 8 miles. Flaps at 20. Harris put in the flaps. The aircraft slowed and the nose wanted to come up and she said, "Forward pressure, small amount, hold it," and he held it and the nose stayed where she needed it. The airstrip appeared. It was exactly where Roe had said it would be, a long thin rectangle of lit concrete against the dark ground, surrounded by vehicle lights and emergency equipment and the shapes of people who had come out to watch something they were not sure was going to go the way it needed to go. It looked short. It always looked short. She had landed on strips that looked short and strips that looked impossible, and this one looked short but it was not impossible, and she had done the numbers enough times to know that it was not impossible, and she was going to land this aircraft. Eyes on the runway, she told Harris. I see it. Good. Don't look at anything else. 4 miles. Throttle back. Gradual. 3. Nose up 2 degrees. Small input. 2. Rose's voice, very quiet, almost to himself, "Come on. 1 mile. Hold what you have. Hold it. Hold it, now. Full flare. Now." The wheels hit. The sound and the feeling of it went through the whole aircraft like a single enormous note, a hard, definitive contact, all 3 wheels at nearly the same moment, and then the reverse thrust kicked in and the brakes bit into the concrete and the runway rushed past the windows and Harris had both feet on the brakes with his whole body and the aircraft shook and the runway end was visible and coming in then. It stopped. 300 feet from the end of the runway, with emergency vehicles already moving toward them, the aircraft stopped. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then the first officer made a sound that was not quite a word. Harris sat with both hands still on the controls and his head slightly bowed, the way a person looks after they have done something very hard and the body is still catching up to the fact that it is over. Rose's voice came through the headset, barely above a whisper. "Ma'am. Good work out there," Maya said. Ma'am, that was you. That was all you." She set the headset down on the console. She stood up. Captain Harris turned around and looked at her. He was a man in his 50s who had been flying commercial aircraft for 23 years, who had handled emergencies and turbulence and mechanical problems and difficult passengers and every variety of hard thing that came with the job, and he was looking at her now with an expression that held something she had not seen directed at her in 7 years. "Who are you?" he asked. Quietly. Genuinely. "Nobody," she said. Then, after a moment, "I was someone, once. A long time ago." She opened the cockpit door and stepped back into the cabin. They saw her. All of them. Every person who was awake, every face that was turned toward the front of the aircraft, every set of eyes in those rows and rows of seats. They saw her step through the cockpit door and they knew, even the ones who had not heard everything, they knew from the faces of the ones who had. She stood in the aisle and she did not know what she expected. What happened was this: somebody in the middle of the aircraft started to clap. One person, two hands, and then the person next to them, and then the row behind, and then it moved through the cabin like a wave, not loud, not stadium loud, but steady and real, the sound of 294 people saying something that they did not have words for yet. The man from 19B was on his feet. He was crying. He did not seem to know he was crying. An older woman 3 rows back reached out both hands as Maya passed and held them out, not grabbing, just offering, and Maya stopped and took them for a moment, both of them standing in the aisle of a grounded aircraft in the dark, holding hands like strangers do sometimes when they have been through the same thing together. She walked the length of the cabin. At the back, near the emergency exit, a young woman in her 20s was sitting with her knees pulled up and her phone in her hand, and as Maya passed she looked up and said, in a voice still shaky from everything, "Are you really Night Fury?" Maya looked at her. She thought about what to say. "I was," she said finally. "A long time ago." The girl nodded slowly, seriously, the way young people nod when they are memorizing something. They let her off the aircraft first. She came down the mobile stairs onto the concrete of the auxiliary strip and the night air hit her face, cold and dry, and she walked away from the aircraft until she was standing in a clear area beyond the emergency vehicles, just concrete and dark sky and the smell of jet fuel and winter. She heard footsteps behind her. She turned. He was still in his flight suit, helmet under his arm, and he was older than she remembered, lines at the corners of his eyes that had not been there before, something steadier in his face than the young pilot she had known. But he walked the same way. He always had a specific way of walking, like he was already on his way to the next thing. Rose stopped in front of her. He stood straight and he looked at her and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then he said, "I'm sorry." She shook her head slightly. "I mean it," he said. "I knew what I was doing when I said your name on that open channel. I knew what it would cost you. I did it anyway." "Yes. I would do it again," he said. "I need you to know that. Not because I don't care about what you built, but because," he stopped. "Started again. Because I counted the people on that manifest, and I thought about what the odds were, and I made the calculation you always told us to make. And the calculation came out the same way every time." She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "Are you angry?" She thought about it honestly. She thought about the apartment in Denver. The cat. The tomatoes that never grew properly. The 7 years of silence that she had carried like something precious, like something she had earned, like the only thing she had that was truly hers. She thought about the woman in the 3rd row who had held out both hands. She thought about the girl at the back of the plane asking, "Are you really Night Fury?" She thought about Captain Harris saying, "Who are you?" with genuine wonder in his voice, the way people only ask a question when the answer matters to them. "No," she said. "Not angry." Rowe exhaled. "What happens now?" he asked. "Not pressing. Just asking. I don't know yet." The aircraft was still being unloaded behind them. She could hear the voices of passengers and crew, the organized movement of emergency services, the distant sound of more vehicles arriving. Soon there would be other people who wanted to talk to her. Officials. Investigators. Probably, eventually, press. The 7 years were over. She had understood that the moment he said her name over the open channel, understood it completely and immediately, the way you understand certain things in the body before the mind catches up. She was not Maya Reeves anymore. Or she was not only Maya Reeves. Or Maya Reeves and the person she had been before were going to have to learn to exist in the same body, which they had been doing for 7 years without admitting it. She looked up. The F-22 was sitting at the end of the strip, NAV lights blinking slowly. From where she stood she could see its lines against the sky, the shape of it, the specific and unmistakable outline that she had spent 16 years living inside of, that she had flown in conditions and places and situations that she had spent 7 years not thinking about. She stood and looked at it for a long time. "You haven't lost it," Rose said, quietly. "Whatever you thought, you haven't lost it. Tonight proved that." "I know," she said. "That means something." "I know that too." She did not say what she was thinking, which was that knowing something means something and knowing what to do about it were different things, and she had the first and not yet the second, and she was going to need time before she had the second, and she was going to be honest about needing that time instead of pretending she did not. That was new. 7 years ago she had not been good at that. 7 years of learning to be ordinary had, perhaps unexpectedly, taught her something useful about honesty. About saying "I don't know yet" instead of making a decision too fast just because making decisions fast was what she was known for. "Give me some time," she said. "As much as you need," Rose said. She nodded. She turned away from the aircraft and she looked out past the edge of the strip at the flat dark ground beyond the lights, and she stood there quietly in the cold air, and for the first time in a very long time she did not know who she was going to be tomorrow, and the not knowing did not feel like falling. It felt like standing at the start of something. She stayed there for a while, in the silence between one life and whatever came next, while behind her 294 people walked off a plane they were never supposed to walk off, and somewhere above her, very high, the stars did what they always did. They stayed exactly where they were. Flight 2209 landed safely at Garrison Military Auxiliary Field at 11:42 p.m. All 294 passengers and crew were accounted for. No serious injuries were reported. The passenger who assisted in the cockpit was not identified in any official statement. She asked them not to. For now, they agreed.